Hi. No, why can't I hear you? Can you hear me?
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hi, Eric.
How are you?
I'm very well. Thank
Good to
you.
see you, Gabor.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, so you just got back from where did you get back from?
Everywhere. Uh, uh, in uh, in September, I was in Turkey, Hungary, Romania,
Yeah.
and then Bosnia and Croatia just for vacationing. And then I just get back from the U.S. and then England and then Norway a week ago today.
Oh, wow. So are you taking a break now or you going to keep moving?
I'm busy for the next few weeks. In the long term, I've just signed a contract to write two new books, so
Two
I'll
new
be
books.
yeah, two new books. So I'll be having to take a break, but not just yet.
Okay. Is that relaxing for you when you write books or is that pretty intense as well?
Uh, I look forward to it. I look forward to just being at home and sitting down with the material and having all day to do nothing but write.
Yeah.
In the past when I've written my books, I was working quite a bit at the same time, except for a
Uh-huh.
few months. But now I'm giving myself a long time, pretty much just to write.
Yeah. Good. Well, you look good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Stephanie says that Ghost is coming out in the UK as well.
It's just been published in the UK. That's why I was there last week or the week before last.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In
So
fact, I did a podcast with Russell Brand.
I know everybody. So we've got about 3,000 people just on Facebook that have signed up for this.
That's great.
So we're probably going to get flooded. So I've got about 10 questions, but a lot of people referred to that interview and they loved it.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was, I'm just mentioning that because that was in conjunction with the British publication of Hungry Ghosts.
Yeah.
And then the other books are coming out in the UK next year.
Do you have names for the books yet?
Names for the new books, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, well, no, the books that are coming out in England are my previous books.
Oh, okay.
But they've also bought the two new books. And yeah, I do have titles. The first one will be
Are you allowed
called,
to, are you allowed to discuss that on the Facebook Live?
of course.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, the first one is going to be called The Myth of Normal, Illness and Health in an Insane Culture. And the second one will be called, I'm writing that with my son, Daniel, and it's based on a workshop that we're giving, and it's called Hello Again, a fresh start for adult children and their parents.
Oh, that's a lot of the questions. Actually, we kind of themed the questions because a lot of them had the same themes, but it was a lot around how to reestablish connection with adult children, where the parents had maybe caused some trauma when they were children.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this should be really exciting. And I feel bad because we got hundreds of questions for you.
That's
And
terrible. That's terrible.
it's
I can see why you feel bad. It would be so much better if there were no questions at all.
well, I feel bad for the people because everybody really wants, a specific answer to their question. So I don't know how tight, and I certainly don't want to go past the hour because I know we scheduled the hour, but if you have more time, are you flexible on time or not?
Yeah, I'm flexible.
Okay. All right, good. Well, why don't we get this going and have everybody get excited to see you. And
okay. No, just camera-wise, am I sitting in the right position for you?
You look great.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah, you look great. Your hair looks shorter or something. My hair is shorter because I'm balding now.
I am too a little bit, but it's mostly it's the function of the fact that I was wearing a hat today, so it flattened my hair.
Oh, well, I always have hat head then.
Yeah. Okay, that. How's that?
Yeah, the beautification of Gabor.
Yeah.
All right. Well, my mission's accomplished then, I guess.
Yeah, we're done now.
All right, let's go live and cross your fingers.
What the heck is that? Oh, sorry.
Is it?
Sorry, this is the house phone. Okay, I just turned it off. This is terrible. Let me get rid of this phone here. It shouldn't even be here. Okay, hold on.
Okay.
Just be one sec. It was in my room. It shouldn't be there. Okay, bye, honey. Have a nice time.
Okay, all set?
Yeah,
All
it should
right.
be fine.
Let's see here. Okay. Just gotta fill in the. All right, here we go.
By the way, do people come on live and they talk to us, or do you read the question? You read the questions.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. All right, just gonna take a minute for it to kick on, I think. Yep, here we go. Okay, here we are. Can everybody hear us? Give us some indication that you can hear us. Here they come. Yay, everybody's excited.
We'll knock that out of them soon enough.
Okay, how is the sound? Can everybody hear us? Okay, good. Okay, well, the long anticipated conversation with Dr. Gabor Mate, and we are so excited to have you, Doctor. And I know that you just got off a long road trip. So as people are starting to kind of come on here, why don't you tell us, tell everybody a little bit about where you've been and who you just talked to, and you've been a road warrior lately.
Only if you drop the doctor a bit, okay? The name is
Gabor. Oh,
Gabor.
okay. All right.
Gabor, okay.
We'll go with Gabor.
Otherwise, I'll have to call you Mister, and the whole thing will become a...
Yeah, I know. But I wanted you to tell me to do that before I did it. So.
Okay, well, fair enough. So thank you. Well, these days I spend much of my time traveling, speaking, both in North America and internationally. So last couple of months, mostly I was in Europe, Eastern Europe, and then most recently in the UK and Norway as well. Also, I did a workshop in New York 2 weeks ago with my son, which we're doing here in Vancouver starting tomorrow night. So yeah, I mean, mostly it's Europe and North America. And in the UK, I was there because my book on addiction in the realm of hungry ghosts is just being published there for the first time. So in connection with that, I did a public talk and a number of media interviews, including a podcast with Russell Brand that I really enjoyed. Mm-hmm. And so it seems did a lot of other people.
Good. And so how is the book being received in the UK? I know that there's been some talk that there's been a lot of funds being cut in the healthcare system to support addiction and mental health. Did you hear any of that?
Well, actually, what happened in the UK just a couple of weeks ago is that they've earmarked an extra $2 billion, I think, for mental health care.
$2 billion.
I have to. I think it's. I don't think it's 2 million. I think it's 2 billion. That's because they have such a crisis there, like as we do throughout the Western world. There's a crisis in mental health.
Yeah.
And now, how these funds will show up and where they're coming from, and whether it's just shuffling of accounts left and right, or whether it's rule of fresh monies, I don't know yet. But they're certainly talking about the issue over in England in a big way. And so the reception for my book, well, after the Russell Brand interview, it took quite a spike on Amazon. So that's the only way I can tell. It's only been a couple of weeks there, so we'll see.
Yeah, wonderful.
But I know that when I spoke in London, it was a sold-out audience, and so I know there's interest.
There is interest. I know for sure there's interest. Actually, a number of the people that were interested in this broadcast were from London and the UK and really all over the world. So this is a very common crisis globally. And it's interesting how the conversation has gone from addiction to mental health. And it's almost the same conversation now.
Well, it needs to be the same conversation for a number of reasons. Number one, a lot of people who are addicted, and this is whether they're addicted to drugs or to behaviors, are actually self-soothing certain mental health issues like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, ADHD, social phobia, and so on. And a lot of the behaviors or the drugs actually are self-medications in that sense. So that's one reason why the mental health conversation can't be separated from the addiction conversation. Number one. Number two, and this is, of course, my point that I keep stressing, and which the medical profession, unfortunately, has yet to understand, is that both mental illness and addictions originate in trauma. And so that no wonder there's a strong correlation between the two, because the same kind of experiences can manifest either in addiction or in mental health issues, or both.
And what is your, we've talked about this before, but I'd be interested in letting everybody hear this. What is your definition of trauma? Because I know that trauma, and when we talked about this last, trauma is different for everybody, but do you have a common definition for trauma?
I do. And I do think it's important to define the term when we use it, because everybody uses it, may use it in a somewhat different way.
Right.
So trauma comes from the Greek word for wound. So a trauma is where there's been a wound, but the trauma is not the wound itself. The trauma is not what happens to us. The trauma is what happens inside us as a result of what happens to us. So just as if you were wounded physically, you'd have a scar formed there. If there was a deep wound, there'd be a thick, hard scar formed. Trauma really is a scarring of the psyche, where it becomes harder and less flexible, just as a scar tissue is less flexible and harder than healthy tissue. And that means that after the point of traumatization, we're less flexible, we're more hardened, we're more predictable, we're less free in our responses to the world. So trauma essentially is a constriction, a scar-like constriction of your psyche that happens as a result of some wound that you suffered fairly early in life. And trauma affects how you see the world, how you see yourself, how you see relationships, how you see other people. It just suffuses every aspect of your life.
Is there something that changes in the brain when we have trauma?
Well, yes, and especially when we talk about childhood trauma, because again, this is another point that despite all the science and what I'm about to say is not even controversial scientifically, but again, it's not taught in the medical schools, is that the brain develops in interaction with the environment. So, and the most important input from the environment on the physiological development of the brain is the quality of adult-child relationships. So that the key circuits that are involved in emotional self-regulation and impulse control and the capacity to be flexible in your responses and to have insight and to have emotional stability and not to be overwhelmed by fear. These key circuits develop in interaction with the environment. Again, the most important aspect of which is the quality, the responsiveness of adult-child relationships. So whenever the adult-child relationships are in a child's early years interfered with, not because the parents don't love their kids and not because the parents are not trying to do their best, but simply because they're stressed or depressed or still in their own trauma themselves, they're not able to be as responsive and as flexible with the kid as the child needs. That will affect the child's brain development.
Well, a lot of the questions that were submitted today were around that parent-child relationship and how to heal that relationship. And I've actually had this in my own life, but this was brought up by many people who submitted questions. And there are many families who are fostering, adopting, and taking in children who come from homes where the parents suffer from addiction. There was trauma, and that led to the children having trauma. And these children were then taken in by a loved one, in by a family member of somebody of that nature. And there was a lot of question around how to balance the need in that new environment for those families who have brought the child in building an environment where both the child and the existing natural children of that family and the parents can all thrive equally, because sometimes the child who comes from the traumatic situation needs a lot of extra attention. So do you have any advice on that?
Well, I salute anybody who, in addition to their own children, brings in another child into their home, a child who's been traumatized and challenged. And that child has been traumatized and challenged, not just by what happened since birth, but even what happened before birth. Because we know that the stresses on a woman during pregnancy will have an impact on the child's development, and particularly the child's brain development. So that's a very challenging situation. And these children have been stressed probably since conception. And furthermore, they've suffered a number of attachment wounds where they've lost the body and the person in whom they first grew. That's a loss. It doesn't matter whether the child recalls it or doesn't recall it, emotionally and physiologically and neurologically, that memory of that abandonment is in the child.
So that's actually recognized within us if that happens, or that child.
You can see it. I often talk about my own example of even as a advanced age adult, but my wife will maybe do something, will disappoint me somehow, and what comes up in me is the reaction of an abandoned child. That's my default setting, because at 1 year I was given to a stranger by my mother to save my life. No, there's no recollection for that in my mind. I can't, because my mind isn't developed enough to recollect anything, but the emotional memory is within me. And so that what happens, unless I notice it in myself, then I'll act out this abandonment scenario. And literally these kids who brought into these families, the children they described, are acting out their attachment wounds. And with all the best will in the world, there's no trust in them, or there's little trust in them. Why should they trust when they've been abandoned serially? So you bring them into your home, that child will not necessarily be loving and cuddly and grateful. They may act out in a whole number of ways, which imposes a whole lot of stress on the adoptive or the fostering family. And then you have the question that you posed. So what has to happen here is that these parents need to be really educated or self-educated in childhood development, in the dysfunctions that a child will be automatically programmed with, simply as a defensive response to what happened to them, not to take it personally, not to see it as a behavior problem, But to really understand the phrase acting out, and acting out doesn't mean behaving badly. It means that you're portraying in behavior that which you don't have the words to say in language. These children are literally acting out their pain. And that has to be really understood compassionately. Now, that doesn't mean that you tolerate all kinds of unacceptable behavior, obviously not, but it's a question of how we respond to that child, whether we do so. It's not a question of do we set boundaries, of course we do, but do we set it with a punitive and upset attitude, a triggered place within ourselves, or do we set it with compassion and understanding of where the child's coming from? And so that's the real challenge. And for that, if I may be so bold, I recommend two of my books. One is on ADHD, which talks about these disturbed children. And it's not just about ADHD, any disturbed child. It's called, the American title is Scattered. The Canadian, British title is called Scattered Minds. And another book I co-wrote called Hold On To Your Kids, which is an attachment-based parenting book, which is really how to understand the acting out of children. And so the parents need to come from that understanding that not to take it personally, the child is not doing it deliberately. They are literally acting out something in them that they don't have the words to express. And that with the proper attitude and compassion, these children can be brought along very beautifully.
How do you communicate that with the other children who are still adolescents?
Well, that depends on your relationship with those adolescent children. If those adolescent children feel well loved, well cared for, well connected, and safely held, they'll tend to react with compassion to the new child. Mm-hmm. If they themselves are insecure, because the family relationships have been tenuous or troubled or stressed, then it's going to trigger them into perhaps jealousy, perhaps anger, perhaps a sense of unfairness of why is this kid getting all this attention that I never got, so I would say that before you consider bringing a troubled child into your home, really look at your own family relationships and how secure and how stable is the family. Because if it isn't, then the new intruder, if you like, can trigger these unexpressed problems very severely. So you have to be very aware of that. Okay. So it's a big thing you're taking on.
Yeah.
It can be done, and it can be done beautifully, and many people do so, but it does require a lot of understanding and a lot of patience, a lot of love.
Okay, thank you. And I have a sister who was brought in. Actually, she ended up adopting 2 of her grandchildren, and I have a cousin who ended up bringing in 3 of his sister's children. Okay. And I'm not the only one. This seems to be something, a growing pattern. And I have a friend who brought in her brother's child as well. So this is something that I think can be very healing, but there's a lot to consider, as obviously you talked about there.
And these kids can be great teachers because, you see, not only does the child have an expectation, so does the parent. As human beings, we have our nervous system expects to be met and connected with. Mm-hmm. So when these children don't meet us the way we expect them to meet us, they don't respond the way we are hurt.
Yeah.
We are upset. All our stuff is triggered. The only difference is we're adults and we can learn to be curious about that and to learn from it and to grow from it. But these kids can be wonderful teachers of where we haven't got ourselves quite balanced yet.
Okay, thank you. And we've got a lot of questions, and I could talk about that for a long time, but I'm going to try to get through as many as we can here. So in terms of a parent who has experienced the traumatic loss of a child, the death of a child, and that parent themselves struggle with active substance abuse, what this woman said was her hope to live a full life when her heart never beats the same again after the loss of that child. How does she hope to live a more fulfilling and meaningful life?
She really has to grieve. Grief is not just feeling bad. Grieving is a process of wave-like pain coming in and moving out again and coming in and moving out again. You have to just ride all that.
Mm.
rather than try to escape from it. There's a wonderful colleague that I have, and I can actually send you her website afterwards. Her name is Dr. Joanna Cacciatore,
Mm.
and she lives in the States, I think in Colorado, possibly Arizona. And she actually works with grief, and she's written a wonderful book about grief. And so people who grieve, they need help with their grieving, because in our society, see, in traditional societies, there'd be rituals and structures for grieving,
Mm.
and the community would support you. You know, in Ireland, women would come and keen for nights. There's the Jewish Shiva,
Mm-hmm.
where the family and friends sit, and you know, all traditional societies have grieving ceremonies. We in our society have become disconnected from our traditions, and so we're very much left alone with our grief. And so Joanne does wonderful work with that. So I would say that that woman who can regain her life, because Joanne herself lost a child. She's a grieving mother herself.
Mm.
So her work comes out of direct personal experience.
Mm.
And so many people are able to turn that grief into something very beautiful and very creative and very contributory to the world. But they have to go through the process.
What does that process look like? Because I don't know that people know how to grieve properly.
I don't know that I'm the best person to teach you about that.
Okay.
I'm just telling you that you have to move through that grief process, and it does mean not escaping from it. So the medical profession is a bit of a tendency, if somebody is still grieving after a few months, to call them depressed and give them an antidepressant. Well, not necessarily.
Right.
What that person needs is support to go through the grief process. And so, again, the best person to talk about grief would be Joanne. And again, if you have a website related to this event.
Absolutely. We'll share her information when this is rebroadcast, and we'll email it out to everybody and post it on the website if you share it later.
Very good.
One thing that I've heard you say in the process of grieving, which was very important, and I think is fundamentally a breakdown in our society, is that we are all very, very alone now. And the process of grieving that I heard has to involve other people to help heal.
Well, traditionally it always has. That's just the way it's been. There's been ceremonies, rituals, procedures, songs, prayers, dances, art, everything.
Okay. And
because we're human beings, and that means we're social creatures. And one of the biggest sins, if you will, or failures of this society is that it fundamentally denies the sociality of human beings, and it fundamentally creates so many disconnections, which is one of the reasons for all the addictions, of course, as well.
In your opinion, has social media contributed to that isolation and dysfunction?
Yes, it has. Social media, first of all, if you look at the origins of the internet and media, it wasn't designed for social purposes. It was originally designed as an information highway. They used to call it the information highway. So it was to be a conduit for mature adults to exchange scientific or technical or other information.
Mm-hmm.
However, in a society where people are desperate for attachment, desperate for contact, and that need for contact and connection is paramount in human beings, then almost anything that you create is going to serve the purposes of trying to meet your unmet attachment needs, your unmet needs for connection. So a cell phone can be a wonderful instrument for all kinds of things, as we know.
Yeah.
But it can also become totally addictive as your way of trying to connect desperately with others because you feel disconnected. Now, what happens, of course, though, is that the kind of connection that happens, I know we're on Facebook, so maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but I'll say it anyway. The kind of connection that happens on Facebook is not really a genuine connection, because even you and I right now, as we talk to each other, we're looking at each other and nodding as I'm speaking.
Right.
Our body language. I'm not just talking to you with words. I'm speaking to you with body language. And you're responding to me. That doesn't happen on Facebook. On Facebook, we present kind of a curated and artificial image of ourselves.
Right.
Then people like us. But what do they like? They don't like the real us because they don't even know the real us. So it's more addictive than it is satisfying because it's never enough. And the reason it's never enough, because you know that they don't know the real you. So these friends that you have on Facebook and the liking that happens on Facebook are pale copies of the real liking and the real contact and the real friendships that do happen to people.
Okay. And what makes real connection? I know that you talk about eye contact, real in-person eye contact. What is how do we build real connection with the people and that we love and want to support and have that ground zero with?
Well, it very much depends on who that other person is. And if it's a baby, it's a very different proposition than if it's, say, my 43-year-old son, you know. But so that what that would look like would be different on the kind of relationship that you're talking about and who that other person is in your life. But it has to be the willingness to be with them, whoever the way they are, and to accept them for who they are. Doesn't matter how that is. And if that's not there, there's no safety. And if there's no safety, there's no relationship, there's no connection. Or at least there's only superficial connections. And there's so many people that go through life with a minimal amount of safety in their relationships where they always feel they have to be on guard, even with their intimate ones.
Even more so sometimes with the internet ones.
I said intimate.
Oh, intimate ones.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although that's true as well.
That's different. Yeah.
But that's also true, as I can tell you.
Yeah. All right. Interesting. So what does a parent do who now has an adult child and was the source of trauma for that child when they were young? How do they go back to reapproach and try to rebuild that relationship?
Well, so you're talking to such a parent.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I talk about this and I write about this, and the 43-year-old son, Daniel, whom I mentioned, he and I gave a workshop in New York just 2 weeks ago, and we're doing it again in Vancouver this weekend. I think I told you. It's called Hello Again, a fresh start for adult children and their parents.
Perfect.
And it's a new book we're going to write together as well. So
that's great. New book.
Yeah. And if anyone's interested, they can just go to helloagainproject.com. I think that's the website.
Helloagainproject.com.
But I'll send you the proper, yeah. And so that's the book we're going to be writing. Now, as somebody who's interested in childhood trauma, I cannot pretend to myself that whatever issues my adult children have had are not related to how I parented them, because they very much are. And I know the kind of parent I was. I loved them. I would have done anything for them as far as I was conscious of it. But I was also largely unconscious of my own stuff and my own trauma. And I was a workaholic doctor. And that sends a certain message to the kid of what the daddy values on the scale of values.
Yeah.
I may have told myself that my family is the most important.
I'm doing it for them.
But that's not how I lived. That's not what they experienced. And without going into too much detail, although I do talk about it in some of my books, my wife and I, we've just celebrated our 49th wedding anniversary. But
congratulations.
Thank you. And when our kids were small, it was a very stressed, very conflicted marriage. So, and that has an impact on the child's development and the child's sense of self and the child's sense of security. So when you're asking, how does a parent who realizes that the children suffered trauma as a result of how they were when the kids were small, well, you're talking to me. And the first thing we have to realize is that it happened. And that doesn't make us bad people. And we're not to be blamed because we did our best given who we were and what we knew at the time. But that nevertheless, what we did have an impact. That's the first thing to realize. The second thing to realize is it's not up to us to fix the child now. That's the child's own trajectory, their own path. We can support them in it, but we can't direct it, control it, pour anxiety and our guilt into it.
Yeah.
That's the last thing they need from us. So it's a question of owning what happened, but not taking away responsibility from the child, from the adult child for their own healing, because it is their responsibility not you can't do it for them. You know, you can support them in it, and when they speak to you, and if they need you to hear their experience and their emotions, then don't be defensive, but be open to it. But
which is hard. It's hard not to be defensive sometimes.
Well, tell me about it. My son and I are writing this book together and doing this workshop, and you should see us on a bad day, you know? So it is hard, but the question is the commitment there? It's not a question of, can we do it all the time flawlessly? It's a question of, what are we committed to? What is our intention?
Okay, great. And a lot of times, for example, I have a friend Allison Hudson, who runs Will's Place out of North Carolina, and they have their county right now, and they're working on changing this, but it has the highest heroin overdose rate in North Carolina and therefore the country.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents come in with their children saying, this children is an addict and he has a problem.
Yeah.
But the parents don't want to accept any kind of responsibility or role. They feel like it's all on the child. So how do you help that parent open up to the idea that maybe they played a part, or they're an important part in the child's recovery now?
Yeah. So that's, again, a big one. What's interesting to me personally is that my book on addiction, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, specifically says that it's childhood trauma in the family of origin that is at the source of all addictions. That's just my point of view, the science and research behind it. I've had parents whose adult children have overdosed and died come and thank me for the book, which is astonishing, because it's not obvious that they would. You think they might be defensive and feel themselves as being blamed, but actually they're grateful for understanding, because what I point out is that this is not personal. Nobody did anything wrong. This is multi-generational. This is unconscious multi-generational trauma. So when I speak to these families, what I say to them is, yes, your child has a problem, and that problem is creating a lot of distress in the family. And that's agonizing for you. And I totally get that. And you're really keen and perhaps even desperate to have them heal because you're worried for them. And there's nothing more natural than that. And you also want peace in the family, and one addict can trigger a lot of turmoil in the family, as we all know. Having said that, and this is where I bring myself in as a parent as well. And I talk about how addiction does not begin with any individual. It does reflect multi-generational pain that's passed on unwittingly from one cohort to another. And once we identify an addict, that's the point that the addict is really the most sensitive part of the family system. It's like the canary in the mine that kills over first, you know, when oxygen is deprived. So, but it's an opportunity for the whole family to realize that this whole family needs healing, and that, in a certain sense, the addiction in an individual in the family can serve as a very helpful wake-up call for the whole family. And then that wake-up need not to be accompanied by recrimination and blame and finger-pointing, but it can create new freedom in the whole family. And I invite them to take part in the healing process themselves. So partly how open they are to this depends on how compassionately and articulately we speak to them about the problem.
Oh, okay.
And to what degree do they perceive themselves as being blamed. Now, having said that, there are some families that are just incapable of hearing it, even if it was said with the wisdom of the Buddha and the loving kindness of Jesus.
Right.
Because they're just too defended against the pain. They don't want to feel the pain that this conversation would bring up for them. And maybe they're defending the whole family system. So they're just too defensive. If they can't hear it, then they can't hear it. Then I work with the individual. But then I speak with the individual and I say, no, you are not the problem. Your addiction, and this is where, you know, perhaps I should talk a little bit about the function of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so I define an addiction as any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure and relief in and therefore craves, has negative consequences as a result of, but cannot give it up despite the negative consequences. That's what an addiction is. I said any behavior. I didn't say drugs. I said any behavior.
Any behavior.
Sex, gambling, shopping. Now, when you give that definition to a room of 500 people and you ask how many here, according to that definition, will acknowledge that at some time or another, they've had some kind of addiction in their life, out of 500 people, 488 will put their hands up. In other words, addictions are that rampant. And then the next question I ask, and this is the key one, is not what was wrong with the addiction, but what was right about it. What did it do for you? What did you get from it? So when I work with addicted people, I first ask them, what do you get from it? They'll say, sense of safety, sense of relief, distraction from pain, pain relief, sense of companionship, a sense of control. All of these things are valid human qualities.
Mm-hmm.
So you validate the addiction rather than invalidate it. No, you don't validate the addiction by saying, yes, it's good that you're addicted, but you validate the need behind the addiction. That you have every right to want those things in your life. They're your birthright as a human being. Let's look at what happened that you don't have them. Mm-hmm. And let's look at some other ways where you might get them, except that is not harmful to you, because the addiction is harmful to you and to other people around you. So, but again, whether I'm talking to families or I'm talking to individuals, you just remove all the blame. There's no room for any blame whatsoever. And that's also terrible about the legal system and the social system and the school system, because it just points fingers at people left, right, and center.
Yeah, and there's story after story, and we had several questions around this. So let me ask you a follow-up question to what you were talking about. How do you, because I think fundamentally we're very compassionate for people. We see people suffering and we want to help them. And we often take on a lot of the guilt around that as well. And we feel a responsibility to heal. And therefore we become, in many cases, enablers. So what is the balance between really trying to help them and be compassionate versus becoming an enabler for them as well?
Well, another word for enabler is codependent. And,
codependency.
Yeah. And let's look at why a person, and what does it mean to be codependent? A codependent means that I am dependent on a person who's addicted for me to feel good. In other words, they need to behave in a certain way so I can feel good, which means I'm using them as my addiction, because the person uses the addiction to feel better. Now I'm using this person to feel better, and unless they behave in a certain way, I can't feel good. In other words, there's some kind of a vacuum inside myself. So enabling comes out of a sense of codependency, and it's not a question of how to. It's a question of, let's look at myself then and say, well, what is the need that this relationship is filling for me that I'm lacking? Oh, maybe it makes me feel important. Maybe it gives me a sense of being needed. Maybe I learned as a child that I'm responsible for how my parents felt, and now I'm treating everybody else the same way, because that's the only way that I could feel loved, is if I took care of other people. So in other words, look at the need that's driving the enabling behavior.
Yeah. And just you saying that, and I know that we've talked about this before, but all of a sudden the word addiction just kind of poofed and evaporated from my mind. And it's just really, how do we heal the pain? And why is the behavior filling the pain?
Well, that's my mantra, as you know, is not why the addiction, but why the pain. And the same thing is true for almost any behavior, actually. Any behavior that somehow brings the opposite of what you want begins as a coping mechanism to deal with some pain that you don't want to feel. So let's just look at what that's about. Let's look at it compassionately, without judgment for yourself or other people. Let's just be really curious about it.
Yeah. Well, I know with my own children and seeing them do things that I assume are causing them high anxiety and aren't good for them causes a lot of anxiety in me. And therefore, I will start prescribing things for them to do just to make myself feel better.
Exactly.
And I just realized that when you said that. So I think I said that to you last time too. So I obviously still have that problem.
The beauty of it talking to me is I have no memory of who said what to me or when. So you can say something 5 times and I'll say, oh, really? Thank you for telling me that.
Okay. I thought it was more important to you than that.
Oh, you are very important.
Thank you.
We could have a session about it afterwards when I can.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So if we look at the system and the system is fundamentally broken, you know,
No, you know what? Let me interrupt. The system is not broken.
Uh-oh. Okay.
It was never whole in the first place.
Okay. All right. So let's look at the system then.
Yeah.
If there was one thing that you could change, if there was just one thing that you could change that you felt would make the greatest impact, what would that be?
Oh, that little word that we've been batting about, trauma. I would make that a mandatory part of the conversation. I would make sure that every teacher, every psychologist, every physician, every counselor, every social worker, every politician, every lawyer, every judge, every policeman. And these are all people that deal with traumatized people all the time, but they have no idea what they're dealing with. They need to be trained in trauma to understand it and to recognize its manifestations, and therefore to see the human being and the pain of the human being underneath the behavior. Now, it's a shocking fact, Erik, that in most medical schools, the average medical student in all their years of training never hears the word trauma. Never mind they don't get a lecture on it. Never mind they don't get a course on it. They don't even hear the word, except in the physical sense, which is astonishing given that trauma underlies most mental illness and all addictions. And so not only that, in my view, a lot of physical illness as well, as a lot of research also shows. So in other words, we're not looking at 2 things. We're not looking at how human beings actually develop, like what do people need for healthy development? What conditions do they need? We're not looking at that. What conditions does the brain need? And then we're not looking at what happens when trauma intervenes and interferes with the healthy conditions. We're not looking at those issues. So that's the biggest thing there is. I make the whole world trauma informed.
A more compassionate system.
You know, the compassion comes out of the understanding. I'm just talking about the sheer basic understanding.
Mm-hmm.
When you see this human being behaving in a certain way, your honor, or officer so-and-so, or teacher so-and-so, or doctor so-and-so, don't you see the symptom? Don't you see the behavior? See the human being. See what happened to that human being. See how what happened shaped that human being, and see how you can help that human being develop along healthier lines. Now that you have some power to intervene in their lives in a positive way. So just understand it. Just understand it. The compassion comes out of the understanding.
That's going to be a lot of work, but you're right. Do you feel like we're leaning more towards that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you look at the political system, no. If you look at the legal system, no. Every time there's some move forward, like there were some positive steps under the Obama administration, you know, against mass incarceration, there was taking some baby steps. Now they're going back the other way again, you know. So on the one hand, social political level, it's pretty dim and grim. On the other hand, the trauma conversation has become much more widespread in the last 10, 15 years. I mean, there's a response to my own work.
Thanks to you, yes.
No, it's not thanks to me.
A lot of thanks to you.
Well, some thanks to me.
You can take the credit.
But a lot of thanks to the people that have taught me, like Bessel van der Kolk, the trauma psychiatrist from Boston, who wrote this wonderful book called The Body Keeps the Score, but he's been talking and writing about trauma for decades. Like Bruce Perry, head of the Houston Child Trauma Academy, who was recently talking with Oprah on 60 Minutes, I think. But he's been at this work for a long time. Like Dan Siegel, psychiatrist and writer in Los Angeles, who talks about the optimal conditions for brain development and understanding what happens to the brain, and the importance of mindful awareness in dealing with clients and with children. So, and I've made my own contribution as well. Peter Levine, who's written wonderful books on trauma and how to work with trauma. All the people that have developed new methods of working with trauma, EMDR and EFT and other techniques, brain spotting. So there's a lot of people, there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of conferences where people are not talking about the subject, which they weren't 10, 15 years ago. So on a social level, it's still a mountain that we have to move, but at the same time, there's much more movement in that direction than there used to be.
Yeah. We did have a number of people submit that kind of question in regards to their loved one who is either native, Aborigine, but has a structure of a tribe. And when their loved one became addicted, they were actually kicked out of the tribe. And that became a very traumatic experience for that family as well.
Well, what we have to understand here is that the Native people in North America have been highly traumatized as a group. They've been traumatized cruelly and severely for hundreds of years. That wouldn't have been the traditional way. The traditional would have been more restorative justice, something inclusive to restore the person to the community, But these communities are highly stressed and highly traumatized now. And they're, unfortunately, the traditional ways is not as accessible to them as they used to be. And I can understand. Look, you're in a small community. Somebody becomes addicted. They be disruptive. They bring in drugs. They might cause violence. I mean, who knows what might happen? And communities, the poor resources, no training in trauma, already stressed to the max. Oh, we have to get rid of this person. I mean, I get where that comes from. It's just so unfortunate, and it's quite contrary to traditional teachings.
Within their culture?
Within North American culture, yeah, for the most part, it used to be much more inclusive and forgiving and restorative.
Okay. All right. So on to the next topic, and I've been holding off on this, but I don't think I can because I know this question's coming up a lot in the stream, and there was a lot of it in the questions that were previously submitted. So it has to do with the use of psychedelics for treatment.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on the use of psychedelic treatments like ibogaine and ayahuasca to treat and heal addiction? And the second part of that is, can it be done, or is it safe to do without processing it without a professional, such as, and one person had actually done this with you and Tanya.
Oh, yeah.
And is it possible, so this person asked, is it possible to have as much growth and awareness come to participants without facilitators holding the space between plant ceremonies and professional shamans?
All right, so let me go to the first part.
It's a big question,
that's okay. Let me go to the first part first. So in the last 10 years, 15, 20 years, but certainly in an escalated fashion, there's been a resurgence of interest in the use of psychedelics precisely because of the well-known failures of Western psychiatry and the dominance of psychiatric treatment by the pharmaceutical companies, which people, for healthy reasons, resist. Although I've taken pharmaceuticals myself with benefits, I'm not here to be an advocate that nobody should ever use them. But they're way overused and they're misused, and they take the place of real treatment very often. That's just the truth. So there's trials going on right now with MDMA. You probably have heard in the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is approved by the FDA in the States and Health Canada in my country these are very interesting, very challenging, very promising studies that there might be a treatment coming. I was going to say online, but it won't be online. But online in the metaphorical
That'd be
sense.
cool.
Yeah, in a metaphorical sense, for PTSD, for example. But it's not that you give the drug to somebody. It's MDMA assisted psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a session. It's a 5-6 hour session with 2 psychotherapists.
Mm.
So I have worked myself with ayahuasca, which is an Amazonian plant. It's not legal in Canada. I've led retreats with it in Latin America, where it is acceptable and legal. I'm leading one next year for healthcare givers. And I've seen tremendous healing with the use of ayahuasca from depression, anxiety, all kinds of personal issues and addictions as well. Not because the substance is specific for any mental health condition, but because when you do ayahuasca, you have access to such self-understanding and such deep experiencing of emotions that you've long suppressed.
So you have better access to why the trauma, or why
you have better access to what you've been carrying inside. The trauma is not what happened to you all those years ago. The trauma is what's happening inside you as a result of what happened all those years ago. So it gives you better access to all the stuff that you're carrying inside you, but you're suppressing it. And one of the ways to suppress it is through addictions, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so I found ayahuasca very helpful for a lot of people. There are no panaceas. It's not a panacea. It's not for everybody, but it's a modality that we're just foolish to ignore. And its illegality in North America is utterly nonsensical. It's not based on lack of safety. It's not based on addictive potential, any of that. It's just based on prejudice, period. Now, having said that, you asked about Iboga, and Iboga is more specific. Iboga actually has the amazing capacity in the case of a lot of addictions, particularly opiate addictions, that if you've been a heroin addict for 20 years and you do Iboga 1 or 2 nights, you have no withdrawal from the opiates. Literally no withdrawal, which is amazing. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. I've seen it. It's true. Now, the second question is, should you do this on your own? My categorical answer is no. I know some people who have worked with the plant extensively, who now do their own ceremonies, and they do very well with it. I know a particular couple who have taken this to a high level, but I don't personally recommend it. I think the contribution that somebody like myself makes, who can help guide people, help them formulate an intention, help them integrate and understand the experience, and the work of the shamans during ceremony. I'm not a shaman. I don't do shamanic work, but the shamans, which is deeply traditional, highly developed, very sophisticated healing work. I think it's very important. Now, some people can have a good experience on their own. I think you're playing with fire.
Well, we heard from a woman who did. She went and I think she went and did the Ibogaine experience, and she experienced worse levels of trauma and depression and anxiety post experience, but she did not have in other words, a continuity plan after the experience.
Yeah, well, so that's the other thing. The integration post ceremony and post experience is so crucial. You know, and I would also say that if that's true for her, then maybe she shouldn't have the right kind of guidance either before and during the ceremony or right afterwards. I mean, what's probably true is that all kinds of repressed anxiety and depression that she had kept at bay, now emerged.
Yep.
And she had no way of dealing with it. And this is where you need the support afterwards.
So it's not that it just kind of fixes it. It brings up all these emotions that have been suppressed. And if you're not capable or don't have a plan to take those on, it can be pretty impactful the wrong way.
It can be. And any responsible provider will actually understand this. and have some plan and structure in place for integration afterwards. This is becoming more and more apparent to a lot of us who have worked with these substances, and it's a subject of important conversations in the whole plant shamanic psychedelic world. But it's very important, and it's essential actually.
Yeah. Well, we look at what self-prescribing has done with the opiate crisis. And people can't, we have a massive crisis because that is a level of synthetic heroin that is devastating and deadly, and, has caused all kinds of problems for us as a society.
Well, again, that's a problem of the system.
Yeah.
Because people should have other ways of getting help. And heretical to say, one of the things that an opiate addict needs is an opiate.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they're an opiate addict, they need that.
Mm-hmm.
And they suffer horribly when they don't get it. So why don't we have systems and programs which can provide people what they need as we go to work on their issues and help wean them off it, instead of forcing them to buy adulterated rat poison laced crap in the streets,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a function of the system. And again, under the current administration in the States, they're taking steps backward rather than forwards. So even jurisdictions, for example, that wanted to have supervised injection sites where people can inject and their drugs can be tested beforehand to see what it contains, and it's easy to do, and they can be resuscitated if they overdose. They're moving to forbid those, and they're threatening cities that want to bring them in with federal legislation and federal intervention. So I mean, it's just horrific. Meanwhile, your country is losing the equivalent of a 9/11 every 3 weeks.
Yeah. It's totally out of control. And we actually had a meeting. We call it community-based recovery in Albemarle, this North Carolina town, where we had the sheriff, we had the ministers, we had essentially the whole community, because it has become such a problem that they are working together and collaborating on how to deal with the issue, where previously it was everybody was in their own silo.
Yeah, well, that's the one thing you can say about the present crisis, is that it's people finally starting to want to do something. But again, unfortunately, they don't have the right tools. They don't have the right tools therapeutically, they don't have the right tools pharmacologically, they don't have the right tools, not enough access to the right tools. Legally, people are constrained, untrained. It just, but at least the conversation is starting to happen, and it's partly starting to happen because the wrong people are dying.
Yeah.
When I say the wrong people, I'm talking about the white middle class.
This is true. I mean, there's a lot of truth to that, right? It started happening in the suburbs.
As long as it was only native Aboriginal people, it didn't matter so much.
Right.
So I'm not saying it's a bad thing that people are awakening, but I'm saying that even that is a function of even what constitutes a crisis has an element of racism embedded in it. When does it becomes a crisis? When it's affecting us.
Yeah, exactly. I call it the conversion model, where you don't really care until it happens to you, and then you're converted, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. What's a good way for people to reach out to you if they're interested in these retreats?
There isn't.
Okay.
I just can't. We have 21 places. This will be for healthcare givers.
Yeah.
I'm doing one next year. I won't even tell you where at this point, because I don't want to get inundated with emails.
Yeah. Okay.
It's for healthcare givers. if specific healthcare givers contact you,
Okay.
if you want to take that on, I'm talking about nurses, counselors, psychologists, physicians, and so on.
Yeah.
And if you want to pass on their names to me, they got to be legitimate. Otherwise, they won't be accepted.
Yeah.
We have 21 places. We already have probably several times that many who want to come. So the chance of, but nevertheless, I suppose you could send me some names and I could put them on the names. But I'm not, and there will be at some point an online thing about it, but I'm not going to. I'm not person advertising it.
Well, why don't we say this? If you have an interest in any of this, then please messenger us on this page and just send us a personal message. And we do have resources and contacts and people that we can introduce you to.
And there are other people who do this kind of work.
Yes.
So that's good. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
And I can certainly recommend some.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe you send the recommendations to me, and then if people will reach out to us on our Facebook private messenger, we will certainly get back to you on all of that.
Okay.
Okay. Wonderful. All right. So just real quickly, as long as we're on the topic, in regards to the drug Suboxone, which is the term of usage that works best to avoid reincidence? Do you have any kind of opinion on that? Is it 6 months, 1 year, the best way to get off of Suboxone?
Well, first of all, I would say if somebody needs to stay on it for the rest of their lives, let them stay on it for the rest of their lives. It's better than shooting heroin, better than shooting fentanyl, better than overdosing, better than getting or giving HIV, better than getting hepatitis C, better than getting a brain abscess. It allows you to live a functional life. A lot of people. So I don't have a fixed term for anybody. It depends very much on individual. Some individuals have the social capacity, they have the resources, the background, the support, the structure in their lives where they can actually work towards getting off it. Mm-hmm. And the length of time will depend very much on the individual. So there's no way I can make a general recommendation. Actually, some people, we can stabilize them, get them off it in a few months. Others may need to be staying on it for a long, long time. And either is fine with me. The issue is the well-being and functioning of that individual, not any arbitrary agenda that I may have for them.
And I think that is such a great answer, because we are so prescriptive in our society and with our healthcare that, I think the answer for a lot of healthcare professionals is 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, whatever the case may be. So I really like your answer.
And I'd want to ask them why. Like, where did you pick that figure from? That 3 months or 6 months of the year. From where did you derive that target time? Because it really has to be patient specific.
Okay, here's one. We're going to go into a couple of questions on couples who are both suffering from addictions. Mm-hmm. So if if one part of the couple suffers from a sex addiction and is in recovery, how do they balance the need for sex in a healthy relationship and not trigger the addiction at the same time?
I'm actually trying to understand that question. So
if I suffer from sex addiction, and but I'm married or I'm in a relationship where the other member of the relationship wants to have sex, and I want to have sex for a healthy relationship, but I suffer from sex addiction and I'm in recovery from sex addiction, how do I balance the need to fulfill my partner in the relationship without feeding or triggering the addiction?
Well, having healthy, intimate, physical contact with a loved one is never going to trigger an addiction. If anything, it's going to abate the need for it. It's not like I'm an alcoholic and if I drink, I can't handle, I got to keep drinking. It doesn't work like that. In fact, the sex addiction is very often a displaced need to be wanted. It's not about the sex. I mean, if sex addiction was about the sex, then all any sex addict would have to do is to marry another sex addict. And now you could have all the sex you want for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But it's not about the sex.
Hmm.
It's about trying to soothe a deep pain inside, a deep aloneness, a deep need to be wanted and to be needed and to be desired. It's about a need to feel excitement of the hunt and the thrill and the chase. It's about the emptiness that's inside. That's what the sex addiction is about.
Hmm.
So building a healthy, intimate, loving relationship is never going to trigger the sex addiction.
Hmm.
The real issue is for the other partner is, what's it like for you to be in a relationship with somebody whose mind and eyes and sometimes bodies wander outside the bounds of the relationship?
Hmm.
That's a difficult challenge because we all want to be
The only one.
we want loyalty, we want belonging, we want connection, we want a sense of trust.
Mm-hmm.
So these are difficult issues. I think it's entirely possible. It takes a lot of and the other thing I would say is, of course, if, let's say, you or I are the identified sex addict and we each have a partner, that partner is just as traumatized as we are, because we always find somebody exactly at the same level of trauma that we're at to get into a relationship with. Now, their trauma may not look
Really?
like,
I've
really,
never heard you say that before.
really, you haven't?
No.
Well, it's only true 100% of the time. So if person forms a partnership with B, person A forms a partnership with B, they're both at the same level of trauma resolution. Now, that trauma may show up differently. In your case, it might show up as a sex addiction. In your partner's case, it might show up as a codependency.
Hmm.
But or whatever.
Yeah.
But so in other words, the partner needs to work on his or her stuff as much as the addict needs to work on his or her stuff.
Hmm.
So that the healing again has to be a partnership. Nobody should think that the other person's got the problem and I'm okay.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, this is so multifaceted in a way that I don't think I know. I haven't looked at before, and I don't know that many people have.
Well, again, there's been interesting work on this, and for people that are interested in relationships, there's a wonderful book called "Getting the Love You Want" by Harville Hendricks, and he points out that we marry kind of a shadow of our parents. In other words, we marry our trauma is what we do.
Hmm.
But it's also an opportunity to heal and to work it out, which you didn't have as a child.
So this is kind of made evident in the next question submitted.
Yeah.
How does a couple who are both healing, one from chemical addiction and one from PTSD,
Yeah.
find a healthy common ground of communication without triggering the other?
Well, first of all, they're both healing from trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's only that in the one case, the trauma shows up in the form of the symptoms of PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
and the other shows up in the form of a chemical addiction, which
Mm-hmm.
the person, and what is the person with the chemical addiction trying to do? Trying to soothe their trauma,
Mm-hmm.
their pain. So that's, in other words, there's no difference between them.
Yeah.
So you got to accept in the way it plays out. The manifestations are different. The
Mm-hmm.
symptoms are different. But the fundamental issue is the same. You got two traumatized people, same level of trauma, otherwise they wouldn't be together. And now how do they heal?
Hmm.
Well, it needs a lot of support, a lot of patience, a lot of help, but they got to start with understanding that it's neither their fault. It didn't start with them. It's multi-generational,
Mm-hmm.
number one. Number two, there's going to be all kinds of times they're going to trigger each other. And they have to get very curious about the triggers. Because, and I've said this before, that when you look at a weapon, how big a part of the weapon is the trigger?
Yeah, really small.
What the weapon is made up of: a gun barrel and ammunition and explosive material. That's each person. Then the other person acts as a trigger. And as in my marriage so often, I go to try and change the trigger. You triggered me, you did this to me. Instead of looking at all the ammunition, all the explosive that's inside me.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, what each person has to understand is that, triggers are going to happen. And each time they do, they're an opportunity for learning something about myself.
Mm.
That person is not doing to you what you think they're doing to you.
Mm.
They're just triggering it, but it's inside you. So that's where the healing can take place. In other words, each person needs to take responsibility for their own reactivity and their own reactions. Mm-hmm. And that takes time, and it's very difficult. And you might as well recognize that at times it's going to feel like hell. Literally, it's going to feel like hell, and you're going to want to bail. You're going to want to sleep on it. And when you're triggered, disengage. Don't try and work anything out when you're triggered. You can't. You're insane when you're triggered. When I say you're insane, I mean your brain circuits are literally taken over by your flight and fight mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't solve a problem from that place. Believe me, take it from somebody who had all kinds of experience trying to do it the right way, trying to do it the wrong way. It doesn't work.
You're so calm, though.
Uh-huh. Ask my wife how calm I am.
Okay. Like people look at me and they go, yeah, I can see him kind of getting out of control, but you, I don't, it's harder to see.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, you should ask my children. You should ask my wife, ask my brother, ask my brothers.
Yeah. It's all relative.
It's all relative. And it's, but also, I mean, I'm 74 and as I often say,
no way.
Thank you for the compliment, but I am 74.
Yes.
But I often say, thank God I'm not as young and stupid as I was when I was 72. Wow. I mean, one does learn as one gets older. Hopefully, one learns.
Yeah.
And it's and if there's anything I congratulate myself for, it's really only that willingness to learn. So we have to be willing to learn, and that means admitting that we don't know.
Yeah. That's really, really important. I know there's so much wisdom in that just kind of flooding to my head right now, and all the learning that I thought I was really smart a year ago. I did something because I thought I was just as smart as I could get. And then I did it and I realized how dumb I was. Yeah.
Well, how about if you substituted dumb for the reality? You weren't dumb, you were blind.
Mm.
There's something you didn't see.
Mm.
And because your vision had been clouded by your own programming.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. No use to, I mean, I know I use the word young and stupid about myself at age 72, but I was purely joking. We need to be kind to ourselves. And so the question to ask is, what didn't I see then? And what prevented me from seeing it? Without self-judgment, without self-condemnation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Well, would you mind repeating the name of the relationship book again?
Do you want me to look it up online very quickly? The relationship book. Oh, it's Getting the Love You Want by Harville Hendrix, Hendrix. Harville has been on Oprah a dozen times. It's a multi-million-dollar selling book, but it's really, anybody who wants to work on relationships, it's a wonderful book. Okay, great. And I'm so grateful, Gabor, for your time, for your friendship. You're doing such important work. And I want to tell us again about the books that you have coming out and the names of them and how people can find them. Sure. So first of all, anybody who's listening from London or UK, United Kingdom, all my books are now being published in the United Kingdom, beginning with In the Realm of Hunger Ghosts, which just came out a few weeks ago. All the others are being published early next year. These are the existing books, When the Body Says No on Health and Stress, Hold On to Your Kids, which is a parenting book. How old are your kids, Eric? That is fantastic. I'll tell you, that changed my relationship, or changed my relationship with my kids. So yeah, it's my kids are 25, 24, 20, and 16. Wow.
Yeah, all boys.
Wonderful. So that book is for parents. Hold on to you, kids. And then my book on ADD, which the Canadian and British title is Scattered Minds. The American title is Scattered. The new books I'm working on are first, and they're not coming out anytime soon. I got to write them first, but I just signed a contract for them.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The first one is going to be called The Myth of Normal, Illness and Health in an Insane Culture. And maybe that title is rather self-explanatory.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked about some of that in this discussion. The second book I'm writing with my son, it's going to be called Hello Again, A Fresh Start for Adult Children and Their Parents. Mm. And anybody who's interested in that, we're going to have a podcast about that book, and as we want people's contributions and stories and questions. So I think the website is helloagainproject.com, but I'll let you know for sure, and perhaps you could put it on your website.
Yeah, helloagainproject.com. And you're looking for. Okay.
We'll have a regular podcast on this issue of parent and adult-child relationships. And we'll have a podcast, we'll have guests, we'll have questions. We want people's stories. So we'd love to hear from people. And also to write the book, we want people's stories.
Yeah.
So people are really welcome to contact us. They'd be more than welcome. We'd be grateful for the contact.
Yeah, and if while you're at it and while you're thinking about it, while you're here, if you have a story or a question in around that topic, you can post them either here on the comment section or in the messenger, and I will make sure to send them over. Is this something that has become, is this kind of a swelling issue?
Well, you mean the adult-child parent dislocation? It is because of how much disconnection this society fosters. That's the first point, the stress that it puts on families. Number one. Number two, it's an issue that people haven't really written about. So that there's been a few books, but they all take a side. It's either the grieved parent complaining about the child, or it's the child complaining about the or the adult child's distress at having a narcissistic parent, all of which is real stuff, but there's no book that just discusses how to work on this relationship and what possibilities it actually offers for a much more satisfying interaction. So that's why we're writing the book.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you're talking about that, I'm thinking about my parents who died over the last couple of years, and I was at my mom's funeral, and a couple of my sisters and I had pretty dysfunctional relationships. And I had I was sitting there and watching, at the funeral graveside service, and I just heard my mom's voice in my head over and over and over again, one word: forgive. And that, that was tremendously powerful for me, and changed kind of all the angst and I think it was forgive me, I forgive you, forgive everybody. But I think that one word is very powerful.
What does it mean to you?
Oh, here we go. Probably love more, express more, and don't be driven by, it's very much about putting boundaries around our relationships to protect against behaviors or things that I had very high levels of frustration around. And once I was able to let go of that, things became much more relaxed.
That's great.
And the relationships improved.
That's great.
I got out of my own way.
Yeah, well, that's it. And we always think it's 50-50, but it's not 50-50. It's 100%, 100%. In other words, when one takes 100% responsibility for their own share of a relationship, the whole relationship changes.
It really does.
Or you realize that this is how it is, and then you're not going to keep working at it, which is fine too. But there isn't a whole lot of angst about it. So the responsibility is always 100%. It's never 50-50.
Yeah, this is true. Any last parting words, Gabors, before something I should have asked you that I didn't ask you? Or
why do I look that bad? Do you think I'm?
No, we've got almost 500 comments, and I haven't looked through them. I'm
No, I'm joking. I'm talking about, last parting words brings up the idea of
oh,
somebody.
yeah. Well, we were just talking about my mom's funeral.
You were. I don't know. Somebody shuffling off this mortal coil, as they say, hopping the twig. No, Eric, I just always appreciate an opportunity to speak with somebody who is curious and open and obviously respectful of my work and wants to know more about it. So I really enjoy talking with you. I don't have any, you know what, you want wisdom? Johnny Cash contains it all.
I love this already.
He's my greatest guru. He's got a song called "It All Goes Down in Your Mind."
What's the name of the song?
In Your Mind.
In Your Mind.
And it's from the soundtrack of what's that movie about this condemned prisoner? Oh gosh, there's a very famous film about a condemned prisoner on death row.
Well, somebody who's listening can Google it and put it in the stream.
And anyway, his song is part of the soundtrack. And Dead Man Walking.
Dead Man Walking. Yeah,
I think so. And the song is called "In Your Mind," and the refrain is "It all goes down in your mind," and it goes 1 foot on Jacob's ladder. In other words, on the way to heaven, 1 foot in the fire, on the way to hell. It all goes down in your mind. In other words, so much of what we suffer from, that I've suffered from, my mind creates. My mind creates not consciously and not deliberately. It creates it out of childhood material, but then we keep acting that out. And if we can actually clear our minds of that old stuff, we can be in the present. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to create hell in our lives. So it all goes on in the mind.
Thank you for that. And what is so important about the presence? What happens there that is so important for us to make sure that we're in the present?
Well, let's say you and your sisters. Mm-hmm. Like for me, when you use the word forgive, what it means for me, I mean, I really like your definition of it, and it doesn't have to be one definition we all parrot, but for me, it means that when you see the person, you see them as they are now. You don't see the past. Mm. You don't see what they did to you 50 years ago, some wound that you suffered, what they said to you. That's not what you see. You see a person with their own anxieties and their own attempt to live as good and satisfying a life as possible. And you may see somebody who feels some hurt around you, and but you're not holding any of that against them. Mm. There's just you and them in the present moment.
That's exactly what it was, actually. Yeah. Well, I would have a lot of frustration around my mom because she seemed so patient for things that I just didn't understand why she would continue to be patient. And I saw that as a weakness.
Yeah. Maybe she wasn't quite so patient when you guys were small.
Oh, I can remember the wooden spoon once or twice, but.
Well, there you go. See, when you say the wooden spoon once or twice, then you say with a jovial smile. Mm. And this is actually important. Because people often dismiss their experiences. How old were you when you got the wooden spoon?
Oh, I never got it. She just pulled it out and threatened.
Okay, how old were you when you
Oh, probably 6.
Okay.
6 to 8.
How did you feel when it happened?
I definitely stopped definitely didn't want it.
Well, you didn't tell me how you felt. You got children. Okay.
Scared. Yeah.
What's it like to be afraid of the person that most loves you in this world and you most want to be close to?
Yeah, you're making me break out in a sweat right now.
I'm not making you do that.
Okay, I'm making myself break out in a sweat right now.
I'm just saying a bunch of things.
Yeah, interesting.
So all I'm saying is that you're not describing child abuse, and you're certainly not describing a mom who didn't love their kids. Mm-hmm. But there's so many ways in which young kids get hurt that we don't even think about. Mm-hmm. I say, well, what's the big deal? So I was threatened with. Ask a 6-year-old what it's like. Mm-hmm. Or imagine, or if you have difficulty imagining it, just take one of your own children. Mm-hmm. Just picture one of your own children in your mind at the age of 6 and imagine their mom taking out a wooden spoon. Mm-hmm. How would you feel about that scene? Would you still be smiling about it? Oh, sometimes the wooden spoon.
I don't even know why I'm smiling about it.
because you're denying the pain of it.
Hmm.
Because you want to love your mom and you don't want to feel that sometimes she hurt you.
Hmm.
And that's totally understandable. And
Yeah.
and I think to realize is that your mom is not being blamed. She was probably a great mom, loved her kids, but at the same time, she passed some of her stuff onto you guys. And that's just what happened.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just got my money's worth right there.
Well, I'll be waiting for your check. How do you want to PayPal, or how are we going to do this?
Do you have Venmo?
Well, I thank you.
Well, the gratitude is 1,000 times from me, and I'm so grateful for our friendship and all that you do. And there's hearts and kisses and everything going up on Facebook right now. So you have a legion of people who adore you and are grateful for you, and very happy that you have shared your expertise.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Okay. I will leave it at that and let you recover from your many travels. And please thank your wife for letting us have you this evening.
I will do that. Thank you, Erik. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.